If you've been watching NASCAR as long as I have, then you've undoubtedly seen the final lap of the 1990 Daytona 500 way too many times, where four cars were battling it out heading down the backstretch when suddenly entering turn 3, Dale Earnhardt dropped off the pace, the TV cut to Earnhardt's wife for some reason, cut back to the track, and the Perlator number 10 of Derrike crossed the line to win the biggest race in American stock car racing in quite possibly the biggest upset in the history of NASCAR. Cope rode the shockwaves produced from this race to a several decades-long career in the top 3 levels of NASCAR, and he's still around to this day as majority owner of Starcom Racing. But that's not the complete story of Derrike Cope. Cope never won another NASCAR Cup Series event after the year 1990, but there's one more notch in his racing belt that would come 5 months after this earth-shattering Daytona 500 victory. This is the story of the 1990 Budweiser 500. This is the story of Derrike Cope's other Cup win. The 1990 Budweiser 500 took place at Dover International Raceway on June 3rd, 1990. The race was broadcast live on ESPN with color commentary by Bob Jenkins, Ned Jarrett, and Benny Parsons. The broadcast team made a heavy emphasis early on in the show regarding inclement weather in the area, but weather would ultimately have no impact on the finish of the race. With Rusty Wallace's victory in the Coca-Cola World 600 and Dale Earnhardt's wreck London race the week before, the points battle had closed to only 21 between the driver of the three and Bud Moore's 48-year-old stud Morgan Shepherd in second. Shepherd would go on to finish the 1990 season 5th in points, which would be the best points effort Moore's team would see again until its closure. The pole winner for the 1990 Budweiser 500 was short track legend Dick Trickle. This was Trickle's first and only pole in the NASCAR Cup Series, and he wouldn't find a NASCAR victory lane until 1996 in the Busch Grand National Series. 36 cars attempted to make the field, and all would start the race as scheduled. The race got off to a quick start as the outside pole sitter Mark Martin found his way around Trickle after holding steady alongside the Phillips 66 Ford for the first lap and completing the pass on the second. Trickle found himself falling through the field in the early portions of the race as he fought a loose condition that allowed others behind him to also pass around the outside as Martin had on the original start. Martin's speed didn't last long as Bill Elliott, driving the Coors Light number 9, found his way to the lead after 18 laps. This battle was cut short as another shocking moment completely changed the perception of the race. On lap 22, Dale Earnhardt came across the start-finish line and his motor immediately erupted, sending him straight to the garage. Once the 3 was parked and on jacks, Earnhardt found himself ahead of only Union, South Carolina's Freddie Crawford, who had parked his James Hilton-owned Chevrolet on lap 9. The 1990 Budweiser 500 would be Crawford's only NASCAR start. In fact, this is the only race that Crawford was recorded as entering on the entirety of Racing Reference. This incident would leave Dale Earnhardt behind the wall for an extended period of time as he got to work himself on repairing the engine. This caution period gave the field their first opportunity to pit and gives us viewers a glimpse into how pit stops worked back in the late 80s. 1990 would be the final year that NASCAR did not enforce a pit road speed limit. It was entirely in the driver's hands how they got in and out of their stalls. Crew members would stand in the middle of the pit lane and hold number signboards to help guide their drivers into their stalls. When crews jumped over, one crew member would unscrew the car's left side lug nuts before the crew were even done with the right side. A good right side stop would take somewhere between 12 and 14 seconds, while a good 4-tire pit stop could take anywhere between 19 and 23 seconds. After a car had completed service, the right rear wheel that received service would remain set in the pit lane. creating another obstacles for drivers to avoid. It's definitely interesting to observe the pit road dynamic from 1990 and compare it to today. Sure, this race took place nearly 30 years ago, but between the recognizable names on the broadcast and on the track, it really doesn't seem that old. The race would resume with the number 33 Skull Bandit driven by Harry Gant out front, who stayed out during the pit cycle. Bill Elliott made quick work of Gant and resumed the lead. During early portions of this event, it appeared the battle for the win would take place between Elliott and Martin, even after quick cautions for an incident between Michael Waltrip and Alan Kowicki, and subsequently the 75 of Rick Wilson blowing up, led to other leaders due to pit strategies. The battle for the win, however, would prove to not be too obvious as the day wore on, especially after Benny Parsons noticed something during a caution period. Thanks to Smith TV's upload of this race being ripped straight from the satellite broadcast of the race, we're able to watch on during commercial periods, one of which Benny Parsons makes note about the speed of one Derrike Cope.
You know, Derrike Cope might be the fastest thing on the racetrack right now.
He's doing okay, isn't he?
The broadcast team watches in awe as Cope's Perliter number 10 drives around the stout number 9 of Bill Elliott with ease, and eventually Cope took the race lead at lap 138. It would be a short-lived triumph though, as a sequence of green flag pit stops quickly broke out after the 10 took the top spot. Several drivers would take mainly two-tire stops during the cycle, and even as more and more cars hit the pit lane, Cope stayed on the track. This would prove to come back and bite the team. Cope passed the entrance to pit lane, entering lap 159, and his car suddenly slowed its pace. The team had run the car out of fuel, leaving Cope on the track for so long, and it seemed that the miracle run that he was on was about to come to an end. Cope successfully made his way onto the pit lane as quickly as he could, and after the team had a very long argument with the car's engine, they were finally able to push the car down the pit lane and get Cope back into the race. This exchange, however, left Cope nowhere near the top spot and barely on the lead lap, as the race lead fell into the lap of Kyle Petty, driving the Felix Sabates number 42. While Kyle didn't win this race, his final career win would eventually come at this same track in 1995. To Cope's benefit, the race settled into a very long green flag run that would stretch for over 250 miles until lap 385. During this long run, the broadcast showed highlights of the previous day's Busch Grand National race that saw Michael Waltrip's 4th career NBS win. Even as Kyle Petty ran strong lap times and lapped top-tier drivers, Dick Trickle would eventually track him down and complete the pass. Trickle appeared to have shaken off the early issues and drove off from the 42 of Petty. Trickle's 63 laps led in the 1990 Budweiser 500 would be the most laps Trickle would ever lead in any NASCAR Cup Series race. Another cycle of green flag pit stops would see Trickle give up the lead on lap 275 to Ken Schrader, who would give back the lead to Derrike Cope 3 laps later. Cope would hit the pit road after leading 2 more laps, leaving the field in the hands of the previous week's winner, Rusty Wallace. Ken Schrader may have been able to come out of this cycle with the lead had it not been for several issues on his 4-tire stop. It was during this period where Dale Earnhardt finally made his way back onto the track after spending nearly 2 hours in the garage area making engine repairs. Dale would make up 4 spots in total, going on to finish 31st, gaining 12 extra championship points out of the day. Don't show this shot to NBC. Here's not only an onboard camera for the 15 of Morgan Shepherd, but a helmet-mounted cam. They had this technology back in 1990. Yeah, this camera did offer a pretty good perspective into the driver's seat despite it going into near black and white most of the time. Morgan Shepherd would finish the race in 6th place and took the points lead from Dale Earnhardt. Shepherd finished all 11 of the first 11 races in 1990 in the top 10, a Cup Series record that would stand for 29 years. He would fail to finish in the top 10 for the next 6 races after Dover. At the end of lap 305, Cope had been making steady progress, driving up into the 10th position despite running out of gas under green just over 100 laps before. Under the next set of green flag pit stops, Rusty Wallace surrendered the lead to Kyle Petty, who in turn surrendered the lead to Sterling Marlin. Marlin was driving the number 94 for Billy Hagan, who oversaw Terry Labonte's 1984 championship. Marlin's best points finish for Hagan came in 1988, where he finished 10th overall. Marlin pit on lap 346, which gave the lead back to Dick Trickle. The 66 would fight to keep Kyle Petty a lap down for the next 18 laps before hitting pit road and surrendering the lead for the final time in 1990. Trickle would only lead 20 more laps for the remainder of his Cup career. This would give the lead back to Derrike Cope, but he'd pit the next lap for 2 tires and gave the race lead back to Rusty Wallace. Rusty appeared to have control of the race squarely in his hands, but that would all change on lap 385. Dick Trickle and Kyle Petty were having a spirited battle for second place, with both drivers getting extremely loose out of the corners. The battle would come to an end when Kyle Petty got into the 66 on the backstretch. Trickle hung on for 3 complete spins before the car eventually righted in the correct direction, and Trickle continued on. With minimal damage on the Phillips 66, Trickle remained on the lead lap and would eventually go on to finish the race in 3rd. Trickle ended his Cup Series career with 4 total third-place finishes, and that's the highest position he would ever finish in a race in the Cup Series. This sent the entire field down the pit lane once again, with Rusty Wallace holding the lead. Derrike Cope came off the pit lane all the way back in position 11. Several drivers contesting their positions on track held the green flag off until lap 392. And when that came around, Rusty Wallace drove off with the race in hand. Cope found himself charging up through the field, making strong passes on the outside lane, taking the 6th position from Dick Trickle on lap 404. Disaster struck for one driver who had been running top 10 all day on lap 419. Jeff Bodine, driving the number 11 for Junior Johnson, was sent into the inside wall on the backstretch. The replay of the incident didn't show a good angle of the incident to tell if any other cars were involved. Bodine would finish the race 8 laps down in 15th. This sent the entire field down the pit lane. Again. Rusty Wallace easily won the race off pit road, but a lightning fast stop out of the Whitcomb Racing Team sent Derrike Cope out in 3rd place. Kyle Petty came back down the next time by, which left the number 10 sitting 2nd with only 75 laps to go. When the lap 428 restart came around, Cope cleared the lap number 5 of Ricky Rudd, but Rudd's teammate Ken Schrader contested the 2nd position with Cope for several laps. As the Perlator number 10 struggled underneath Schrader's Kodiak number 25, all the while this battle took place, Wallace drove off with the lead. Cope finally cleared Schrader around lap 433 and set his sights on the Miller 77 that was slowly shrinking in his windshield. The green flag dragged onward, but Cope persisted. On lap 446, Cope drove hard into turn 1 while Rusty's car pushed up the track, allowing Cope to drive under and take the lead out of turn 2. The 10 absolutely set sail at this point, adding several tenths to the lead every lap. ESPN interviewed Cope's crew chief, Buddy Parrott, right after this pass for the lead. During this interview, Parrott called Cope a young driver.
Buddy, a big smile on your face once again. It took a lot of hard work to get him back up front, didn't it?
Well, it really did. We made a mistake on the gas, and my strategy all day was keep fresh tires on the car, and then we had that bad pit stop buzz with the gas mileage. But anyway, the car's running great. Bob, don't count us out, baby. Don't count us out.
Can he hold on? Can he hold on? And will his tires last?
Well, that's what we got to do. You know, Derrike's a young driver, but he's a hard charger. So if I can just talk to him and keep him on cool off on those tires, he'll be okay.
Derrike was 31 and a half years old when this race took place. It wasn't long after this pass for the lead that Ken Schrader and Dick Trickle caught Wallace for the 2nd position, both of whom got around the ailing number 27 with ease. According to an interview during the race with Wallace's crew chief, Barry Dodson, the complete collapse of the car's performance was blamed on a loose set of tires. Wallace would continue to fall through the field, eventually finishing the race in 10th. Derrike Cope held the lead for 55 laps after passing Rusty Wallace. His closest competition in the final run may not have been second place Ken Schrader, but rather the slower traffic he was lapping on the track. Every time the 10 caught traffic, Schrader would gain. But when Schrader caught the same traffic, the 25 would drop back. In the final handful of laps, Schrader cut the lead from 2.8 seconds to 1.2 seconds. But it wasn't nearly enough to catch and pass Derrike Cope. After running hard every mile, after grabbing the lead early but losing it after running out of gas, and after fighting to stay in the lead lap during the middle portions of the race, on the 500th lap of the 1990 Budweiser 500, Derrike Cope crossed the line in the first position and he won his second career NASCAR Winston Cup Series race. The race officially lasted 4 hours and 2 minutes. To put that into perspective, the 2016 Coca-Cola World 600, a race that's 100 miles longer than Dover was, lasted only 3 hours and 44 minutes.
Derrike just catching his breath and getting out of the car, getting a big drink of Gatorade. Derrike, congratulations on an excellent effort.
Thank you very much. I'll tell you, it was an excellent run. Thanks, buddy. I'll tell you, the Pure Leather Chevrolet Lumina, it ran perfectly all day long, right from the start, and I was just trying to be patient, you know. We're just starting to learn about this Chevrolet, and I'll tell you what, it definitely had my heart beating all day, but we're looking good. And the team worked hard, had some great pit stops. I couldn't believe it. It was incredible.
They said maybe in Daytona you might have backed into one. This one you didn't back into at all. This one you earned all day long.
Well, you know, we struggled a little bit after Daytona, and we were emphatic that we were going to come back and we were going to get one, you know, for sure on our own laurels. And we knew we were fast here. We didn't qualify as well as we wanted to. The driver kind of like gave up a little bit qualifying, but we drove hard all day long. I drove hard as I could, and buddy, those guys, they busted little tails in there as hard as they could, and it all came together for us.
Cope led 93 laps in this race and would only go on to lead a total of 168 laps for the remainder of his Cup Series career. Cope would only go on to finish in the top 10 3 more times in 1990, bringing his season total to 6. His 2 wins were the only top 5s on the year. The Whitcomb team was plagued with engine failures all season, which relegated Cope to 18th place in the standings. It would be the lowest points finish for a full-time Cup Series driver with multiple wins on the season until Ward Burton in 2002. The 1991 season was no different, as more mechanical failures relegated the team to 28th in the standings. Things improved in 1992, but not nearly enough, as the team shut down following the 1992 Hooters 500 at Atlanta. Cope would move on to team after team during the course of his seemingly endless career. But in 2017, Cope would found Starcom Racing, where he continues to work to this day. Cope's final NASCAR start to date is the 2018 Darlington Southern 500. Over Cope's long, winding career, no moment would ever equate to what he experienced in the 1990 Daytona 500. Lightning nearly struck twice, literally, for Cope in the 2019 Firecracker 400, where his team and driver Landon Castle sat second under caution. Had Castle stayed on the track when Kurt Busch pit, Castle would have been declared winner of the race, and Derrike Cope would have had another miracle victory at Daytona fall into his hands. But there was one race that wasn't a miracle, or maybe in a way was an even bigger miracle than Daytona. Derrike Cope won the 1990 Budweiser 500 on speed, after running out of gas early on and fighting tooth and nail for over 4 hours to gain those positions back. There are a lot of people who question Cope's worth after having the biggest stock car race in America fall right into his lap in the last 20 seconds of the event. There's still people that question the legitimacy of his career to this day. But I would say that Cope answered all those questions on one hot June afternoon in 1990.
Here's the checkered flag, and Derrike Cope wins the Budweiser 500.